And we're live.
And we are live. Good evening, Ericka.
Hello, Robert.
Hello, Ericka. You
Hello.
know, hello. Is it live or is it Memorex? The outrage of the day, by the way, and we'll talk about it in a second. The Pentagon has over almost $1 trillion budget. It's like 850 billion. They have now failed 7 audits in a row. They can't tell you where all the money went. Right? If you want a microcosm of what's messed up in the government, now you know why you want someone like Pete Hegseth, who's a soldier, to come in there and just clean house. And
Yeah.
in any event, we'll get back to it. But they have momentum. They say,
Yeah.
like the spokesman McCoy goes, well, they have momentum, and we expect to get a fully compliant audit by 2028. You're the accountant, right?
Oh wow. Wow, wow, wow. Wow, 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 wow. You would not be surprised how many times I've tried to look at the books of the various cities or townships I've lived in, and I've even asked the auditors before. I'm like, "What is this account that's like right here? I don't recognize what this is." And they're like, "Yeah, that's why it's in the audit notes." And I'm like, this is where it's
Yeah,
getting funneled. It's where
almost a
it's getting
trillion dollars a
stashed.
year, and they can't tell you where the money's going to. So
It's gross.
most of it's going to all those woke commercials about DEI and the Navy will whatever. Let's roll it because I'm going to get in trouble if we go down this road. Hello and welcome to Of the People. What a difference a day makes. The day, of course, is November 5th and Trump's landslide. But since November 5th, you have to look at everything that's been happening, right? Nationally, Senator Schumer, who's the Senate Majority Leader, soon to be ex-Senate Majority Leader, we call him Schumer for those of us in the know, has now done one of the great pivots in history. He is now a champion of bipartisanship since the Trump election. He is cautioning his Senate colleagues to not misread the will of the people. I think Senator Schumer can take great solace in the fact that I don't think anyone is going to misread the will of the people. And let's not forget that Senator Schumer is the same person who was, if they had control of the Senate, was championing the ending the Senate filibuster, right? Eradicating the rights of the minority in the Senate, passing a national abortion rights law, and expanding and packing the Supreme Court. What happens after he loses control of Senate? Now he is a convert to bipartisanship. You can't make this stuff up. And as far as the law is concerned, in this case, voting law, it seems that voting laws only apply to Republicans, at least if you're in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which up until yesterday was still counting votes illegally, according to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in the McCormick-Casey recount, which clearly Senator-elect McCormick is going to win. And then there's, of course, the fact that Bruce Springsteen, Cher, Babs, Sharon Stone, am I missing anybody? Rob Reiner, Robert De Niro, have still not booked their tickets out of the country, and I think we're all waiting for that. But on a serious note, since November 5th, internationally is where you're seeing things really change. Qatar, which was housing the Hamas leadership, has kicked them out. Now, interestingly enough, they end up in Turkey, which is a NATO country. So if Israel continues to target Hamas leadership on NATO country soil, that's going to be interesting indeed. But Iran is now changing their tune even before Trump takes office, and they are pushing for a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. I can't imagine why. It harkens back to the days, because I was around during the Iran hostage crisis under President Carter, and the minute Ronald Reagan got elected and sworn in, the hostage crisis was over. Seems pretty familiar. In Afghanistan, the Taliban are now calling for a new chapter of relationships with the U.S., and even China's Xi Jinping is calling for cooperation between the countries. That one, I think you got to take with a grain of salt. Against this backdrop, there was just the meeting of APEC, not to be confused with OPEC, which is the oil producing countries in the Middle East. APEC is the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation. They had a meeting there. Who's front and center in the photo op? Xi Jinping. Our president, sitting U.S. President Joe Biden, whether you like him or not, was not only front and center, he was back row, and he wasn't even behind Xi Jinping. He was back row, second one from the end to the right, way back here. I am a Kremlin watcher from way back in the days of the Soviet Union, and where you sat on the dais was all important. It is the height of disrespect in all of this. Ladies and gentlemen, we have said this till we're blue in the face, that elections matter. But the hard work is now ahead of us. That's the state of the world we're inheriting. And reforming big government and restoring America's foundational values is where the work needs to begin. And if you're looking for Washington, D.C. to solve your problems because Trump is going to save us, it is hugely important that you have President Trump in office and that he's going to try to rein in big government. But in terms of restoring America's foundational values, that starts in our communities and in our houses of worship. I mean, Ericka, as you and I were talking about, the Pentagon can't even balance their budget or get through an audit statement 7 times in a row, but they're in the right direction. You have FEMA, who was targeting or avoiding Trump voters or people with Trump voter signs in terms of doling out aid or signing people up for FEMA aid. And the reason they gave it was really instrumental, because Trump voters are, quote, more likely to be hostile. Where else do we see that sort of rationale or ass backwards logic? Anyone who is a person of faith or a devout person of faith, those are also people who are more likely to be hostile, according to the federal government. The federal government still sees conservative Christians and people of faith as the enemy. And if you don't believe me, search the term Christian nationalism, and there's a new term I just learned, radical traditionalist Catholics, right? So those changes start in the community. They start in our places of worship. And it's that harbinger of change or bringer of change that I think Trump and others will bring about. And that's really going back to America's foundational values. And that is the monologue. And Ericka, I am proud and pleased to have joined with us Chris Widener, New York Times bestselling author, one of the leading motivational speakers in the world. I am also happy to say he was my co-host at Israel Appreciation Day. Could not have done it without it. And his new book out, which is The Coming American Revival, speaks to what we were just talking about. Chris, welcome back to Of the People.
Thanks for having me. You know, I got to tell you, I was thinking about that when you were talking about nationalism. Somehow Amazon categorized my book into nationalism. And I got up as high as number 2 for nationalism.
There you go.
And it's so funny the way they try to pigeonhole you in order to make sure that nobody likes you. So, but I appreciate having you guys, have me on. So,
no, absolutely. Look, going through the book, you know, the subtitle is The Blueprint, or the biblical blueprint for igniting a nation, you know, a nation's soul. Talk a little bit about the role of faith in not only in America, but what you saw during this election and sort of the returning to God's, what you say is God's foundational truths, which I would also say is, you know, America's foundational principles anyway, right?
Absolutely. Anybody who tries to tell you that this nation wasn't founded on biblical principles just literally is either dishonest or hasn't done a bit of research. You know, when I was putting on some events a few years ago with President Trump, one of our 4 pillars of the day was faith. And I took about 15 minutes every afternoon, and I would talk about faith and the importance of faith in American history. And I asked people to imagine if faith was removed from America, what would we see disappear? And of course, first thing is churches. Churches would be gone. Synagogues would be gone. That's what people think of. But then you start thinking of everything else. Orphanages, colleges, Montessori schools, high schools, middle schools, grade schools, hospitals, food banks, you know, all of this kind of stuff. If you stripped America of anything that had faith-based roots, you wouldn't have much left of America. Now, I will say this about the book. It is primarily targeted for Christians in that I used to be a Christian pastor, but I would say this, Number one, the premise, the passage in the book that is the premise for the entire book is actually found in the original Testament, right? And that is where the Jewish folks find themselves, right? So it is, it's from 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. And it was right after Solomon dedicated the temple. God came to Solomon and said, basically, if things go awry and you guys end up in trouble, you know, whatever, he said, here's the answer. If my people who are called by my name, talking about the Israelites, if my people who are called by my name will, and then he gives 4 things that you have to do in order to create restoration. Number one, humble themselves. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and forgive their sins and heal their land. So to me, this isn't so much just about Christianity. And we've had these discussions before. It's one of the reasons I loved hosting with you at the Israel Appreciation Day is we've divided into 2 worldviews in America. You have the traditional Judeo-Christian worldview, which believes in capitalism and freedom and those kinds of things and the role of faith. But then you have, you know, the last 50, 60 years, the rise of the secular humanist worldview, the communist, Marxist, socialist, anti-capitalist worldview. And here's the problem. It gets even deeper than that. The humanist worldview, whenever you see a communist state, the first thing they go after is churches, synagogues, people of faith. Go to China. It's not just Christians and Jews. It's Uyghurs. It's the Falun Gong or whatever, if I pronounce that right.
Falun Gong, right.
Falun Gong. They cannot have another God. And so they eliminate anybody that tells you there's another God, which is why there's a perpetual war between the left and those from the Judeo-Christian faith. And here's the other deeper root, and this is why people say, will we ever have unity? And the reality is, I don't believe we will ever have unity until we show people the demise of that worldview. And here's why, because both worldviews view their worldview with a moral imperative. We used to just argue about how it happened or where we were going to go. Now we argue about whether or not it's good or evil. If I'm doing it, it's good. If you're doing it, it's evil. And that has created this, you know, this brokenness in our country. And I believe that the answer is a revival of faith.
So you talk about revival of faith in the book, and you talk about the cycle, God's cycle for the faithful. Talk a little bit about that, because we always, where are we in the cycle? And I come from an old school that says if you forget history, you're bound to repeat it. And I think what we're really talking about, or you're talking about, is that if you forget God or you forget faith, it just affects the cycle. But again, my words, not yours. God's cycle for the faithful.
Yeah. If you're a believer and you believe that there is a God and that he is involved in human affairs, then you have to ask yourself, what is it that God wants from people? And I believe that the number one thing that God wants from people is a relationship with us. I mean, literally from the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve sinned, the very first thing that God did was made clothing for them. He wanted to cover their shame. Right? He cares about us. All of the Psalms, all of the stories from the Old Testament is all about God's love for Israel. And not just like, hey, I'm going to have a little ant farm here and I'm going to, he wanted a relationship. And so every time in the Old Testament, when you see the Israelites turn away, God says, here we go. We got to bring you back over here. And so it's not just Jewish history in the, what Christians call the Old Testament, but it's human history. We are by nature people who turn away from God and into our own ego, into our own self, and those kinds of things. God's number one plan for us is to have a relationship with God and to understand, the rules that he has created for our world, not just because he's an ogre who likes to create rules, but because he understands how the world works, right? Don't cheat on your wife.
To be disciplined.
It's like, don't cheat on your wife. Whoa, he's a fuddy-duddy who doesn't want me to have any fun. No, he wants your children to grow up in a home with two parents. He wants those two parents to love each other and to grow old together. It's not just because he wants to create rules. It's because it's the guidebook for life.
Yeah. Maximum human flourishing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. That's all the time. When the older I get, I have some experience and I'm like, oh, I've read about this in the Bible. Like this exact thing has happened in the Bible. It's basically, even if you took the God part out of it, right? Like even if you were an atheist or an unbeliever, you could read the Bible, Old Testament and New, and have a guidebook for how to live a decent life where you aren't a drain or a burden or a suck on society, where you can actually be a value add.
Yeah, people always, the Bible and this, that, and the other, and go, okay, so what part of the Bible, would you, disagree with? What wouldn't make your life better? Don't lie. Don't commit adultery. Don't murder.
Don't steal.
Love one another. Be kind to one another. Forgive with one another. Bear with one another. All those kinds of things. God gave us a guidebook for, just like, you get into your car and you want to know how your car works. What's the first thing you do? Well, when I get a new car, first thing I do, I bring the manual. And I start reading that manual. A lot of people, they only go to the manual when a light comes on. I go to the manual at the very beginning. I want to know how the car works. I view the Bible and the scriptures as the manual. It's like, here's how life works. But we get into these cycles. And here's where I think that we're in the cycle today. We had a very strong faith-based country in the 1940s, 30s, 40s. Judeo-Christian worldview was essentially the only worldview. We won World War II. We came back and we entered into the greatest economic expansion in the history of the world. Yeah. We moved to the suburbs. We built big churches and synagogues. We what do they call it? Urban sprawl. Now we're out in the suburbs. And this is almost always the way it happens. People fall away from God when they get stuff.
Yeah.
Because which is why Jesus talked about stuff and money so much, because he realizes that it has that pull. It's a good thing when it's used well, but it's also something that Jesus recognized as a an issue, right? Yeah. And so in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, that was the first generation, the children of the returning GIs who got wealthy and moved to the suburbs. They forgot their faith.
Yeah.
And that gave way to the rise of secular humanism, the God is dead movement, the, do drugs, drop in, drop out, whatever it was, Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary. Tune in, turn on, drop out.
Yeah. Well, and that would have never existed. That would have never existed 50 years earlier. Nobody would have tolerated that. But when you look at how degenerate our society has gotten. Think about this. I'm kind of partway through a new Elvis documentary. They wouldn't shoot the guy below the waist on television because they're afraid of his twitching leg.
That's right.
Lucy and Desi were not allowed to sleep in the same bed, and she was not allowed to use the word pregnant. Now we have RuPaul's. Yeah, you didn't know that, Ericka? They were not allowed to use the pregnant part. They had to call it with child or something like that.
Why?
But now we have RuPaul's drag show, and
worse than that.
Kind of,
I mean, the Netflix is basically like softcore nowadays, and it's
and that's just the real estate shows. my wife sells real estate on part-time, and so we start watching this show called Selling Selling Sunset, or one of these things. It's the Oppenheimer Group out in LA. Okay. And I just said, I can't watch this crap anymore. Number one, it's very, very fleshy, but number two, they just argue all the time. And I'm like, if I wanted to argue, I just find some people I don't like. I don't want to watch argue.
But what does it say about society that people get their reality from TV as opposed to being in reality themselves? Let's watch what other people are doing. But exactly. Let's come back to the book, because you talk about revival and that the country has gone through cycles of revival. I think you identify 4 or 5. Right? Cycles of revival. So I still want to come back to cycles and revival. And then you break out, revival of the church, revival of the family, revival of education, revival of what you call the marketplace, which I assume is sort of, conservative economy or the economy itself. You talk about politics and you talk about cultural revival,
Yeah.
If we have to revive all of those things, we're starting at a deficit.
But those get taken care of when the individual heart is revived. You don't just
Fair
pick
enough.
an institution and go, ooby gooey, there the schools are all better now. But when all of a sudden you have people of faith or again, like you mentioned earlier, even if you're an atheist, but you come from that Judeo-Christian worldview, when those are the people in charge, you don't have to change the institutions. They change by themselves. And these cycles have been, we've had the First Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening, Third Great Awakening. Then we had the Azusa Street Revival in the early 1900s in Los Angeles. Then we had the Jesus People Revival in the early 70s, which gave way to the Calvary Chapel Fellowship and those kinds of things. They tend to come about every 50 to 70 years, which is interesting because when I decided to write the book, I looked for books on revival. And having been a pastor in the 80s through 2002, I was aware of one book called Why Revival Tarries by a British pastor who lived in America. And it was written in the 1950s. It's been 70 years since there's been a significant book written on revival.
Wow.
And then when I look at an actual widespread revival, it's been since that Calvary Chapel Jesus People Revolution in the early 1970s. It's been 50 years since we've had a widespread revival. But what happens is when, and this is why at the end of the book, I have a 31-day devotional every single day. First 10 days are about personal revival. Second 10 days, again, from my tradition, church revival, but you could talk about it from synagogue revival. It's whatever your community of faith is. That is revived because the individuals are revived. They create a revived church or synagogue. A ton of people, tens of millions of people, and churches and synagogues revived produces a revived country. And that's why I say that the revival is coming to America, but it starts with individuals. It drives through their community of faith, and it reshapes the context and the surface of the country that we live in.
Okay, so wait, hold on though. Before you move on,
Yeah.
was it, how did it go? Ooga booga
Ooga
gubba?
booga booga. You got to do this. You got to do Tim Waltz hands. I call this Tim Waltz hands now.
Hey.
But by the way, so just so people know, not only where can they get the book, but also
Yeah.
you have a lot of endorsements in the book. Senator Scott, you have John Rich, you have Rebecca Weber, obviously AMAC, and we have AMAC, Andy, Mangione coming on after you on the show. But you sent your first book to whom?
Oh.
Well, I sent the first copy to President Trump, and I got to know his team and everybody when I was putting on not seminars, but big events for him 3-4 years ago. And I sent it to him, and I inscribed it to him. I wrote a little note in there as to why he was getting the first copy. And I ended up getting a little letter from him, which was pretty amazing.
And turns out we have that letter, ladies and gentlemen.
There it is. Yeah.
And here is the letter from President-elect Trump. What I love about the letter, and you and I were just talking about it, what's the date on the letter?
Election Day.
Hey.
And I got to tell you, I took it down to a framing shop today, and I took the cover of the book, and I took this letter, and you don't even want to know what I spent on a picture frame. But I was like, that's almost that's a car payment. But no, it's great. The thing I love about President Trump, and people question, his faith. Is he legit? Does he really believe this, that, and the other thing? But I would draw people's attention to Cyrus in the Old Testament. Cyrus, the Persian king who helped the Israelites by overthrowing Babylon. And of course, Cyrus was not an Israelite. He was not a Jew. We probably don't even know exactly what he was. But even if President Trump is not a personal man of faith, which I believe that he is, but even if he wasn't, he's almost like a Cyrus character, or Queen Esther's husband. Esther was the one who prompted it, right, but her husband was the one that made the decision. And he wasn't particularly a religious type or something like that. And so what I see is under President Trump, we have a reprieve. People are like, Trump has saved America. Nah, Trump gave us a reprieve. My greatest fear is that all the Christians and all the Jews and all the people of faith are going to go like this. Whew, boy, we sure dodged one there, didn't we? And right back to the way that we were constantly living. And here's the problem. Our political problem is not the problem. Spiritual problem gives way to the political problem. The political problem is merely a symptom of our deeper spiritual problem. And I believe that with all of my heart.
Yeah, I think you said something earlier that I thought was really important, and it's, we've gotten comfortable when you no longer need to rely on God for your livelihood. And I'll just, for my own personal experience, I'm a recovering addict and alcoholic, and once my life got really good and I started making money and everything, it was like, oh, thanks God for getting me sober, but like I'm good now. And it wasn't long before I got really spiritually sick, because you think, oh, now I've got it. And then but it's like, no, I still need God in my life. I still need that direction, that comfort, that purpose. And without it, we lose our compass, I think is what you said.
Well, and this is what Blaise Pascal, the famed mathematician, said. He said, inside of every human is a God-shaped vacuum that only God can fill. And here's the reality. And of course, in Western culture, and particularly scientific method and all those kinds of things, there's people now that will disagree with it. But we are not physical beings who have a spirit. We are spiritual beings who have a body.
Yeah.
And we are designed to live eternally. I don't believe that we pre-existed. I believe that God created us, but he created us almost like, remember math? You had a ray. Do you remember what a ray was? It was a dot and then it was an arrow.
Yeah.
We're rays is what we are, right? He creates us, but he creates us designed to live eternally, which is why God is so concerned about our spirituality, because 70, 80 years into this thing, if we're lucky, we shed the body.
Yeah.
And now we're spirit. And the spirit is what lasts. And I think that's why God is so passionate about his people having that relationship with him and experiencing spirituality. People talk about eternal life. Oh, when I die, I'm going to heaven. Your eternal life starts the minute you make your commitment to God. Now you have eternal life, right? We think of it as something way out there, and then we kind of live our life right here in the moment. But the way God designed us is when we come into that relationship with him, that's when eternal life begins, and it moves forward forever.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Chris Widener, his new book, The Coming American Revival. Chris, where can they find you? Where can they get the book?
Sure. ComingAmericanRevival.com is the simplest way to get there, ComingAmericanRevival.com, or you can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or, some other online bookstores. We actually, I wrote this book about 4 or 5 months ago, and we rushed it to print to get it out by the election. And so it's not available in bookstores, because if you want to get things in bookstores, you're looking at a 1 year to an 18-month deal. It's all online at Amazon. We have a print version, we have a Kindle version, we have a audio version, and it's available today, and it's doing quite well.
And ladies and gentlemen, you can find the link for the book and for more information about Chris in the description of this video. And if you've gotten something out of this conversation, if you've appreciated it, we ask you to leave a like, leave a comment, let us know what you think. And subscribe to the channel that you are watching. All right.
Chris, we're going to have you back. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. You guys are great.
Absolutely.
All right. So now we're going to hear from one of our sponsors, American Center for Education and Knowledge.
Socialism. The goal of socialism is communism. The world is quite familiar with socialism and the horrors socialism has brought with it. It wasn't that long ago. Actually, it's still with us. Socialism creeps into government slowly until it's too late. Socialism, the big lie. Yes, it could happen anywhere. This educational video was brought to you by the American Center for Education and Knowledge.
and paid for by people like you who care about the future of our democracy. Please help us continue our work educating the American public and consider supporting ASIC by making a tax-deductible donation at asicfund.org.
And we are back.
Yes.
And now joining us, let's bring him in, Andy Mangione, who is the Senior VP of AMAC Action, or AMAC, which is obviously the Association of Mature American Citizens. Andy, welcome to Of the People.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. So I know, the way this show works, you were probably in the green room listening a little bit about Chris Widener, and, Rebecca Weber was one of the people endorsing Chris's book. So I know there's sort of a synergy in this, all the show, but, AMAC is the largest, 50 plus conservative, I wouldn't even call you senior organization, but 50 plus organization in the country, membership almost 2 million, also a sponsor of Israel Appreciation Day, which we wanted to thank you for as well. But we wanted to sort of build off of what we've talked to Chris about and sort of the coming American revival and the role that AMAC saw of faith played in this election, because all the numbers we're looking at, whether it's, the Catholic vote or just the evangelical vote, really showed up in a large way, I think, and was one of the difference makers in November 5th. But you're closer to the ground, than we are on that. So I'd like to get your take on that.
Well, I think, first of all, AMAC is an acronym for the Association of Mature American Citizens. I'm Senior Vice President for AMAC Action. We're the C4 not-for-profit. We're the pugilists. We fight. I represent the membership in Washington, D.C. On their behalf and in states throughout the country. And when you're talking about what role faith played in this election, I think it's a very good question. I know I've had countless conversations with many, many people. I think it was July 13th when President Trump was almost assassinated. And my wife and I were sitting on our porch. I believe it was a Saturday. It was a beautiful summer day. And I'm scrolling through my phone and I saw what happened. And I just looked at her and I said, I hope God spared his life to be president. Mm-hmm. And I cannot speak for God, but when I related that to other people, and anyone with faith that I talked to, regardless of the denomination, said exactly, we can't speak for God, but we hope that he spared his life to be president. And I think that, that type of faith resonated among Christians, Jewish people, among everybody. And how could you, I caught the last bit of your interview, and and when people are questioning President Trump's faith, I have to believe, how could you get shot in the head and have that not change your life? How can that not, how can he realize, or how could he not realize that this was not a coincidence? He turned his head just in time. That bullet grazed him. It still hit him, but it could have been much worse. And he might have had an epiphany. And I believe he did. And I believe that people could sense that epiphany with every speech that he gave, every rally that he attended. You saw the numbers of people there. Yeah. And I think things changed for him spiritually after that, after that assassination attempt.
I agree. I remember the first couple of times we saw him after it happened, and they his whole face changed, like his deportment changed, and I said, how do a near-death experience can't not change you? It can't.
Exactly right. And I think when he talked about it, I watched, when he talked about it, I watched speeches after the attempt, and he said, I'm here because of the grace of God. That was genuine. It was authentic. It was believable. And I think it connected with people, not only in the arena, but anybody who was watching.
Yeah.
And like all of us, right? And a flawed and imperfect messenger, right? But there are, at least I know I am, right? Ericka, you may not be,
I'm perfect, but I don't know about you guys.
That's absolutely you are, as far as the guys on the show are concerned, right? We've learned, but I want to, because everyone expects, my friends, I talk to them and they say, oh, Trump save us. And I keep trying to say to them, and again, part of the conversation with Chris Widener, who was our prior guest, also want to get your take on this, is how do you complete the work? Because the solution is not in the government, right? What we want to do is get the government out of the way,
Right.
and we want to return it to the communities. You want to return it to your, houses of worship. A little bit about the First Amendment. It always makes my head explode when I listen to some of the talking heads when they say, well, the Constitution doesn't say that about guaranteeing freedom of religion or guaranteeing, and I'm like, yeah, it does. Right. And people, even my friends say, well, Trump save us. And it really isn't the solution, Andy, back in the communities, houses of worship. It's not. We just want Washington out of the way, right?
Exactly right. When you talk about Trump save us, he's a man. He's a man. He's mortal just like we are. He's a flawed sinner just like we are. And we have to take a step back and look at the reality. He's going to have about 18 months to 2 years to make any changes. He's going to act quickly. And we're looking forward to that. But let's be realistic here. Accept Jesus Christ. Save yourself. All right. Realize that your fate is in your hands. It's in God's hands if you get to know him. And I think that these houses of worship are reiterating that message. But we are given free will to make the most out of our lives. We could follow Christ or we could not follow Christ. That's up to us. No one man is going to determine our fate. We determine our fate. And I think that if you put your fate, or if you put all your faith in politicians, it's misguided. Put your faith in God.
Yeah, I mean, how is that any different than the left, than liberals who are like, oh, the government can save you,
Right.
so we're going to have all these programs and whatever that always end up hurting people. Like, it's the same thing. I do not believe that there is a person or a government official that can save me. Wait, what is the quote, Robert, from Ronald Reagan? Like the scariest words.
Hi, I'm from the government. I'm here to help you.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the most disgusting things I heard during the Obama administration, I think it was Jamie Foxx, who was introducing President Obama at the time, and he said, "Our Lord and Savior, President Obama." I
missed that one. Ouch.
I think I threw up in my mouth a little bit there. I'm sorry for the graphic.
So gross.
But it was just something that I was just so, as a Christian, as a Catholic Christian, I was offended by what this is what we're up against. I think one of the things that President Trump revealed was that the left has an insatiable lust for power. They don't care. As long as they will step over the corpse of their dead mother to get it, to expand it, and to maintain it. Yep. And this is what we're up against. Their God is, as you well known, is abortion. Their God is expanded government. Their God is climate change. Yeah. This is what they don't care what the country looks like if it's in ruins, as long as they get to rule over it. They will live one way and we will live another.
Yep.
And this, I think President Trump kind of revealed that during his campaign. We have much more work to convince other people, other people, like-minded people, that this is exactly the opposition. This is who we're up against, and they're not going to change. They'll be back. That's why President Trump only has 18 months to 2 years to make effective change.
Because, and I was around and I did, work in helping the Bush reelection in 2004 when we won both chambers. And I remind people that in 2006, we lost both chambers, right? So it's and President Trump is term limited, and the Democrats understand how to play chess. I do want to add something, Andy, that the pendulum is starting to swing the other way. One of the people we talk about sometimes on the show, I don't know if you're aware of the superintendent of education in Oklahoma, a gentleman named Ryan Walters, who is introducing in the educational system there, putting the 10 Commandments back in the classroom, right? Putting the Bible back in the classroom. And look, as someone who's Jewish, right? I understand the value of faith, and to me, I don't see really any difference between because that's why they call it Judeo-Christian values, right? But that's why when you look at, there are some people starting to fight the fight, because the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights basically says that the government shall pass no law, and it means the federal government that establishes a religion, right? There's the Establishment Clause, but it doesn't mean that states aren't free to address this issue as they see fit, as you're seeing with like Ryan Walters in Oklahoma.
Absolutely. And fortunately, we have wonderful organizations that we've partnered with, the Alliance Defending Freedom, that spends a lot of their resources on defending the First Amendment. And we have done some campaigns with the ADF in terms of free speech and freedom of religion. You're absolutely right. And I'm a big fan of federalism, and I'm a big fan of power to the states and the federal government being
The 10th Amendment.
Yeah. Maintain my infrastructure. Okay. Maintain an army, protect us in terms of the military spending here and abroad. Make sure I've got nice roads to drive on. But beyond that, leave it to the states and they'll take care of it. And that's why, you have to be vigilant in all 50 states. And AMAC action was, and on specific issues like election integrity, we did and life. And some issues where some conservatives were being debanked based on their conservative values by large banks, and we helped get a bill passed in Tennessee, signed into law that prevents that from happening. It should be model legislation for other states. So we're keeping an eye on these things. But you're absolutely right that it's a good thing that the states can act independently of the federal government, but it doesn't mean that we cannot be any less vigilant with what they're doing, as in addition to what's going on in Washington, D.C.
That's right.
No, I agree with that. And I like to point out these examples as we go, because as I look back at the election, right, and hindsight being 2020, I will tell you that I think, because from all the data I've seen, the Catholic vote, I think, surged nationally 10 points in favor of President Trump. In 2020, if I remember correctly, it was almost 50-50. I think it was like 50-49 or something like that on a national level. There's a 10-point spread. And I think part of that is, and I'd love your opinion because, we get into the weeds here a little bit, is I think when Kamala Harris, who I think was about as flawed a candidate as there was, but on so many levels, I wouldn't know where to start. But when she skipped the Al Smith dinner in New York City, which is, it's sort of an anti-Catholicism laid bare to me. It was disrespectful. It was, I don't know. What's your take on that? But you look at seminal things in the election, right? I look back at Mitt Romney, who, when he reached across to Barack Obama in the debates and said, "I'll bet you $10,000," you lost the American public, because the American public doesn't bet $10,000. That's right. They'll bet $1, right? So when she skipped the Al Smith dinner, which I just thought that sent a signal to, the faithful Catholics of America that, I disrespect you. What's your take?
Well, I think that was a disrespectful, colossally stupid move on behalf of Kamala Harris. I also think that when she made fun of the two college students who were at their rally site, I think, what did they yelled, "Christ is King" or "Christ is Lord," words to that effect.
King. Yep.
What she could have said? She could have said, "Amen, amen." Now here's what I have to say, but she didn't. She said, "You're in the wrong wrong rally. Go to the smaller one down the street." I also think when she didn't choose Josh Shapiro to be her running mate, which would have been the more logical choice, she may have won a couple of those swing states. We could be talking about a completely different outcome today.
That's right.
I think she was an equal opportunity offender, but she upset Catholics by not going to that dinner. She upset every Christian by the way she reacted to those two college students, and she upset our Jewish friends by not choosing somebody who could have really helped the ticket, as opposed to the guy that she did choose, who was just a comedy of errors.
Yes. Well, and that's one of the things that is so funny to me, is like, I love it. I think it's perfect. She went all the way left. She said, "You know what? I'm here. We've already been, Joe already broke his mandate to be a moderate. I'm here. I'm just going to go for it." And the country said no. They made it clear and decisive. No, we don't want your leftist policies. We don't want communism. We don't want socialism. We don't want transgender surgeries.
Right.
Free in prisons, for the love of all that is good and holy.
And that, and for not to mention, I mean, the topics that really really concerned AMAC members, included immigration, included election integrity. They feared for the sovereignty of their nation. They knew that the borders were thrown wide open. It's said, and I've read some recounts of the election, that abortion wasn't necessarily as big an issue as it was 2 years ago in the midterm
Right.
elections. But I think what countered that were all the moms and all the parents of school-aged children in public schools that were realizing and had seen and had witnessed what's going on with secret social transitioning, what was going on behind their backs with their children. That may have countered or overwhelmed the abortion issue this time. This is why we must remain involved. We must remain engaged. We're very blessed with an AMAC membership that's over 2 million Americans over the age of 50 in all 50 states, and they are highly engaged. And we rally them from time to time on specific issues in the states and at the federal level.
That's
But
amazing.
we need that level of engagement, and it doesn't take much. It's just being informed. We saw leftism on display for the last 4 years. We also saw what was going on in schools with COVID, when everybody was learning from home, and parents were keeping an eye on exactly what the curriculum was and what was being taught. So I think all these kind of added up to a vote for President Trump to counter an abortion issue that the left was really relying on, that really didn't materialize.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, isn't that age group like the most reliable demographic to vote as well? Isn't
Yes, in terms of getting out the vote, yes.
Okay.
Our members are, and I tell you, 2,500 AMAC members worked the polls in 13 key states, including Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, all of which were won by President Trump. And I just wanted to add there, we did a 6-month campaign to ask our members to commit to working the polls, because we needed as much conservative scrutiny on these elections as possible. And they stepped up.
I love it.
But by the way, the one thing that I would fine tune to what you said is that the last 4 years were leftist policies. I would tell you that the last 12 of 16 years,
40, 70 years, 80 years.
Because I would argue that Joe Biden's term was nothing more than a third term of Barack Obama in one form or another. And it depends if I want to put on my tinfoil hat, about exactly how much, Obama and his people were involved in the third term of Obama anyways. And come on.
It's not necessarily a tinfoil hat, because it was the Obama administration in terms of staffing, and the staffers reconstituted. So,
that's right.
I don't think you have to put on a tinfoil hat to figure that out.
No, I get it. So in the time we have left, for the people who don't know AMAC,
sure.
How do they find you? Tell them a little bit about the things that AMAC action,
Benefits.
and we understand, we have the RC3 and C4, and I love the word pugilist. I think I'm going to steal that word for American Coalition, because I love, being a pugilist. I get that, but AMAC action. What are the things that you're involved in? How do they contact you? How do people? Because this all does come to Trump's not going to save us. We have to save ourselves, and that comes to getting involved with organizations like AMAC, and building that membership. So, talk a little bit about that.
I'm happy. AMAC was formed 17 years ago to compete head-to-head with an organization that says that purports to represent every single American over the age of 50, and they don't. All right. We have over 2 million members in all 50 states. You can get the same types of benefits, the roadside assistance, all the insurance products, all the Medicare products, travel discounts. We're constantly building that out. We have a very robust menu of benefits for people to join. But what you also get is full-throated conservative advocacy in Washington, D.C., and in states throughout the country. And I'll just give you a quick example if we have time. We ran a 17-state campaign to educate members on critical election integrity issues like banning ranked choice voting and ensuring that only U.S. citizens can vote in our elections. And the objective of these campaigns was to drill down the details so our members could learn about how good or bad some of these issues were, and cut through the noise that was being made by dark money groups that are misinforming voters. And every campaign included an urgent plea for AMAC members to get out and vote. And we activated about 800,000 of our 2.1 million members in these 17 states. I'm happy to report that these critical election integrity ballot measures were passed in 11 states. and with measures still
Nice.
pending in other states, because they're still counting votes in some states. So what you get as an AMAC member is full-throated conservative advocacy, like-minded people, and we also have the AMAC Foundation that is our education hour. That's the C3 that specializes in Social Security. They're experts at Social Security and Medicare. They have a hotline that people can call. You don't have to be an AMAC member to take advantage of it. But right now we're running a special, $1 for 1 year of AMAC membership. And you can go to amac.us/sign up. So for $1, try us out. We put out a wonderful magazine that comes out 6 times a year that's chock full of great information for $1, and it covers a household. So it'll cover you and your spouse. $1 for 1 year, amac.us/sign up.
And I want to add to that, Andy, that AMAC, right, the Association of Mature American Citizens, AMAC was the first organization when we put together Israel Appreciation Day. Chris Widener, our prior guest, was my co-host. The first organization to step up and say we support this was AMAC, and for that we are so appreciative, because really what we really all know is this isn't, even though there's this anti-Christian, I would say, bigotry in the government, and that's a whole term of Christian nationalism, and they've dubbed sort of the devout Christians as the most likely to commit domestic terrorism. I mean, all sorts of craziness, but it's really about Judeo-Christian values that are under attack, right? And what I say to my friends, because they talk about this whole river to the sea thing, I have to explain it to them. I think most of them know it now, but I said, look, guys, the Jews, we're the canary in the coal mine. We're the tip of the spear here.
Mm.
If they drive the Jews into the sea, I said, you're Christian? They would say, yeah. I said, you're next.
Mhm.
I said, because that's really what this fight is all about. So for me, to you, and to Jonathan and everyone else, and Rebecca, we wanted to thank you, because you guys were the first organization to really step up to support Israel Appreciation Day, which was bringing together people who might not have agreed on a lot of other issues, but agreed on this and said, well, let's put our differences aside, because this is important, because it's not just about Israel, it's about Judeo-Christian values and Western values.
One of the reasons that our late founder, Dan Weber, who's Rebecca's father, started AMAC, because he recognized the attack on our Judeo-Christian values, and he wanted to return America to those values. The support for Israel is a tremendously worthy cause, and thank you for the acknowledgement, and thank you for what you did.
It was I was just the eye candy. We put together a hell of a volunteer team. But so, Andy, thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Andy Mangione, Senior Vice President of AMAC Action. Go look up AMAC, and if you're not a member, join. Now is the time.
Yes.
Andy, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Good show
This
today,
was
Robert. Good show today.
Well, but you know what it comes down to, right? It comes down to what I was talking about in the monologue, and it really struck me when and one friend in particular, we were talking about it, because I hope Trump will save us. And yes, we want Donald Trump as president. I think it's great. He's a float. But I said to him, it's not about Trump saving you. Right. It's, yes, you want to rein in the federal government. Yes, you want smaller government. Yes, you want government accountability. Yes, you want to get this DEI woke nonsense out of government. But, we also public schools, right? What we call government run schools, right? You want things back in local control, and it really requires people to engage and be involved. So Chris Widener, Andy Mangione, and the people who are really making a difference. It's just really heartening to me that, and it's going to be a long battle. We didn't get into this overnight. This is 20, 30 years that we sort of have taken our eye off the ball. It's going to be another 10 or 20 years before we get this back.
Unwinding the administrative state, all of the, the spy agencies,
That's right.
I mean, how do you undo, what was it Kash Patel was saying? I was listening to Kash Patel, who we had on the show recently, talking about there's something like 7,000 FBI agents or something like that. That's why. How are there 7,000 FBI agents and we still have trafficking problems? and crime and fentanyl coming across the border.
Because they're looking the other way, and they are focusing on only those things that they feel need to be fought from a culture war standpoint. Let's
That's
not
right.
forget. You go back to Barack Obama, who famously said, about flyover country, which means not
Yes.
New York, not LA, but everything in between. Well, those are the people who cling to their guns and their religion,
Bitter
right?
clingers. Yep.
Bitter clingers, and they're the enemy, right?
Yeah.
Again, people look up the term Christian nationalism. It's coined by the federal government,
Yeah.
right?
They're
It's in that.
busy. They're
Right.
busy coming after good, decent, law-abiding citizens. They're worried about trying to figure out how to create de facto gun registries and all this other stuff, rather than what they were created to do. And
Right.
so, as
So
with everything,
So it's not about the Trump saving us. And Andy Mangione is correct. We
Yeah.
talked about it. Trump has 18 months. So there is going, and you think the liberal media has their hair on fire yet? I mean, you do have to love, however, Morning Joe Scarborough, and Mika Brzezinski, who
oh,
suck up now because their ratings are in the tank. Hat in
dude,
hand, they go meet with Trump. They meet with the devil
the
himself, right? According to the
devil,
left,
right?
they meet with Donald Trump. And now they have the revolt on their. It's just from their step. It's just
My favorite,
it's amazing to me.
my favorite thing, Robert, is Charlemagne the God, lowercase
Right.
g, was like, oh, now that the election is over, they're all like, oh, peaceful transition of power, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, it's almost like they were lying to us about how dangerous Donald Trump is. And I was like,
Bingo.
ding, 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 ding. Like,
ding, 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 ding.
give the man his prize. Hey, here's the deal. Like, if Trump turns out to be the Antichrist, I'll be the first person to eat my shoe. Okay. But until then,
You don't wear shoes. That's what I heard.
it's my, I got my fancy hippie shoes on today, my Birkenstocks. Okay.
I love the footprint. Can you show everyone the footprint? Come on, let's see the footprint. You need to change those soles, babe.
They're brand new. No, these are brand new. That's like what happens. It looks more gross than it actually is.
Okay. Put your shoes back on. No one wants to see your shoes. Okay. But look,
I'll eat it though. I will.
Look,
Pork and all.
again, let's reestablish, revitalize, restore back to traditional values. And it doesn't mean telling everyone else what to do. That's the other side, right? This is about personal freedoms and personal responsibility, and looking out for your neighbor, and being able to congregate in your houses of worship and through your community involvement and things like that. I mean, that's really what this is. And that's the 10th, the concern I have is that he's got a lot of work to do in 18 months. So that pendulum is going to swing the other way really hard. And if you think that the liberal media has their hair on fire now, just wait until Trump follows through on what the campaign promises that he made, and we'll see what happens.
There you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here. You'll continue to hear our guesses, our hypotheses, our theories. We should start calling this political theory. Maybe that
would make me who? Jean-Jacques Rousseau in The Social Contract?
Hey. Okay, so if you like this video,
more like Machiavelli, but that's a different discussion.
So if you like this video, if you got something out of it, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel.
Wait a minute. What do you mean if they got something out of it? If you're listening, you got something out of it. Subscribe. Leave a comment. I mean, give us your best shot.
You liked it. You hated it. Who cares?
Right.
Do it anyway.
I care.
Subscribe.
I care.
Hate watch us. All of the engagement. Hey, engagement is engagement, ladies and gentlemen.
Excuse me. Do you think anybody could hate watch you?
Oh, absolutely.
No chance.
For sure.
No, except for